Here in part 3, let's briefly talk about parasitism, another positive-negative relationship among organisms. We can divide parasitism into two categories: the ectoparasites, in which the parasitic organism is living outside of the body of its host, or endoparasitism, in which the parasitic organism is living inside of its host. In the first case, we're talking about mistletoes, a plant growing on another plant. In the second case, we're talking about Plasmodium, a eukaryotic parasite transferred by mosquitoes that lives within humans. And just remember that parasitism is a symbiotic relationship between two species. One benefits and the other is harmed. Again, this term had sometimes been used, had been described as consumerism. Now, mistletoes are a very interesting group. We see mistletoes, we often think of them as ornaments associated with Christmas time. They are parasitic, they grow on the branches of trees, and they can become quite large. Mistletoes spread through seeds. Birds are attracted to these seeds, but once eaten, the bird realizes that the resource does not taste good and immediately vomits them, typically on a branch. The seeds on the inside are sticky, and these sticky seeds attach to the stem and begin to grow. Now, mistletoes are xylem-tapping parasites. They put out a root, but they're not aggressive. That is, that this root started growing at the beginning of this growing season here. So remember that tree rings describe a growing season: early in the season, mid-season, and late season. So these two began growing, these 3, 4, 5 began growing one year, and this root began growing a subsequent year. Now, remembering the anatomy, these are xylem cells, and we'll have the cambium, the undifferentiated tissue right here, and the phloem would be on the outside of that. At this point, we'd have a clicker question. Which statement is false? Mistletoes photosynthesize and are therefore parasites. Mistletoes receive water and nutrients from their host. Mistletoes are ectoparasites. The incorrect answer is A. They do photosynthesize, but because they photosynthesize doesn't mean that they would necessarily be a parasite. That combination is not obligatory. So parasitism often leads to a co-evolutionary arms race. That is, that there's an evolution between the parasite attacking its host and changes in responses in the host. So Plasmodium is a eukaryotic parasite that attacks humans. It is transferred by a mosquito. The result of the Plasmodium is a disease called malaria. Malaria is very common in the tropics. Southern parts of the United States occasionally have malaria as well. Now, there is a defense that humans have evolved against malaria, and that's called the sickle cell gene. So sickle cell anemia, though, is a disease associated with individuals that are homozygous for this gene that then defends against the malaria attack. So if you're HB big S, then you have the sickling allele, and it causes the red blood cells to have a sickle shape, and that ends up defending them against the Plasmodium. But if it's homozygous, we find that individuals are fully resistant to malaria, but there's a downside. These cells are more sticky, and that results in strokes. As they're more sticky, we also find that as people age, they get a lot more aches and pains. There are ways to treat this. So an individual's median long-term survival after adulthood is 14 years without treatment and 42 years without modern treatments. So the heterozygous is resistant to malaria as well and has minor anemia. So the disease that we often see in terms of sickle cell anemia is for the homozygous HB big S. And of course, the HB small s homozygous is susceptible to malaria, but doesn't have anemia. So which of the following statements are true? A, symbiosis occurs when two species have a mutually beneficial interaction with each other. Sickle cell anemia in humans evolved as a defense against malaria and is therefore always adaptive. Endoparasites end up not having any negative effect on their hosts at all. And here are the answers. False, false, and false, with the explanation for why they're false.